Maria Theresia Von Paradis was a Viennese musician and composer. She is known for her accomplishments as a woman in 18th and 19th century Austria. Although she was blind and a woman, she was determined to pursue music. In this pursuit, Maria achieved many great things for women and the blind. She was a famous composer and pianist and also started many great institutes for music education for the blind and sighted. Maria Theresia Von Paradis broke not only one, but two barriers that existed in our time, which now allows better education for women and the blind.
Maria Theresia Von Paradis was born in 1759 in Vienna, Austria, as the only child of Rosalia Maria Levassori della Motta and Joseph Anton, who worked as the Imperial Secretary of Commerce for Empress Maria Theresa. Maria had a rough childhood, and at the age of 2 she began to lose her eyesight due to an ocular disorder. By the time she was 5, she was completely blind. With the help of the Empress, young Maria was still able to get an education and study music. Professor Hidemi Matsushita of Arapahoe's Community College describes Maria's education.
Because of her status, her father worked as a secretary for the Empress Maria Theresa, whom she was named after. Her empress sponsored her, so she was able to get a good education, not just in music, but in all sorts of fields.
She studied with Antonio Salieri, the composer and music director of the imperial court. He was also the teacher of other famous musicians, including Beethoven, Schubert, and Liszt. In 1773, Salieri composed a concerto for Maria to play on the organ. Maria studied piano under Leopold Kozoluk, a Bohemian composer. Maria actually made Kozoluk's work famous, especially in England. Piano became Maria's specialty, but she also studied singing under the Italian Vincenzo Regini. Regini was known for his composition of operas, most of which were performed in Vienna. He moved to Vienna to conduct his operas and teach singing, which is how he met the young Maria.
Maria had great teachers, but learning music still proved to be a challenge for her. Because she was unable to read music, Maria had to learn music by ear and memorize it. Maria became very good at the piano and singing. After many years of learning and practicing, Maria began to perform in public.
At the age of 11, Maria held a special performance for the Empress. She sang the soprano part of Giovanni Battista Pergolesi's Stabat Mater while also playing the organ. This was Maria's first success as a musician. At the age of 16, Maria began to play all over Vienna from concert halls to salons, which gave her the nickname the Blind Enchantress. Eventually, Vienna became too small for Maria, and she began to travel the continent on a 3-year tour. At the age of 24, she began touring across Europe in big cities like Salzburg, Frankfurt, Munich, Bern, Geneva, Lyon, Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, London, Hamburg, Prague, and Berlin. This made her very well known throughout the continent. One critic from her Paris concert even exclaimed, "One must have heard to form an idea of the touch, the precision, the fluency, and the vividness of her playing."
After some time spent traveling, Maria decided she wanted to compose music. There was not an existing system that allowed her, a blind musician, to write down her music. Her dream of composing eventually became real with the help of her librettist, Johann Riedinger, who developed a system for Maria to notate her compositions. This invention included a pegboard, which allowed her to write down her music without paper. It consisted of pegs of varying shapes for various note values. She would then have someone transcribe the pegs into written music.
Although her music was written down, Maria had each of her 60 piano concertos memorized note by note. Maria studied composition with George Vogler, a German composer and theorist whose ideas in music laid the foundation for music of the Romantic era. Much of her music contained the same style of Romantic music, but also some elements of the Classical era. For instance, it included emotional lyrics and was written in a flat minor key. Other characteristics of the time included many dynamic changes from forte to piano and syncopated 16th notes. Her first recorded piece was 12 Lieder auf ihrer Reise in Musikgesetz, which translates to 12 songs set to music upon her journey. Maria began to dedicate more of her time to compositions and less time to performances. She wrote many piano sonatas, 3 cantatas, 5 operas, and many other piano and vocal works.
Each cantata was written with a purpose. Her first was to honor the late Emperor Leopold II. The next as a symbol of her father's recovery from illness, and the third was written in memory of King Louis XVI of France, who was a fan of Maria's.
Maria's operas also became very famous. Arianna und Bacchus and Der Schulkandidat, 2 of her most well-known operas, were performed in Vienna, each having 6 showings in a prominent Viennese theaters, including Laxenburg Schloss Theater and the Marinelli Theater. Rinaldo und Alcina was another of her operas, but it wasn't as successful and only held 2 performances in Prague. Maria wrote many types of music. Many of the scores to Maria's works have been lost, including 2 piano concertos and 12 sonatas. Maria's compositions became very popular, but she still seeked more out of life. At the age of 26, alongside Valentin Aoui, a blind man Maria met during one of her performances in Paris, Maria helped establish the first public school for the blind. Maria saw this opportunity as a way to give other blind people an education and a chance to explore and grow their own talents. At this Parisian school, named the Royal Institute for Blind Youth, students were taught the tactile alphabet or pinpicks that Maria had developed to help herself read and write. Maria taught Aoui the ways in which she learned math, reading, and music so that he could also teach the students the same. The students learned many of their subjects using Aoui's system of embossing books with raised letters. Aoui later realized that this system of raised Roman letters would not be successful. Louis Braille, who would later create a raised alphabet for the blind, was a student here. He replaced Aoui's system with his own more efficient and effective system. This school was one of the first for the blind. This was also the start of Maria's passion for education. In her 40s, Maria began teaching music and founded a girls' music school in Vienna. The school gave young girls lessons in piano, voice, and music theory. She wanted to give girls, blind and sighted, a chance to get a musical education that was usually reserved for boys. She spent the next 15 years teaching here until her death. This may have been the end of her life, but her legacy continued to live through the barriers she broke and the contributions she made to society. During Maria's lifetime, women did not have the same rights as men. They did not work, and their place was thought to be in the home. They were viewed as the head of the household, but that didn't give them any rights. The popular view at the time was that women were the lesser sex. Maria, being from a higher class family with connections, was lucky enough to get a music education. Education was usually for girls of middle and high class families. These girls were then expected to marry into a wealthy family. Maria broke this norm by never marrying. This was very unusual for women at the time and may be considered against their purpose. She was able to do this through the name she made for herself. Instead of being a wife or a mother, she was a musician, a composer, and an educator. Although blindness came with a second-class status, it also brought certain freedoms. Maria's disability made men consider her less desirable, but also allowed her to live out her dream of being a musician. Near the end of Maria's life, views of the blind transformed. Society changed as people realized that the blind shouldn't be deprived of what others have, including an education and a career. Maria contributed to this change with her School for the Blind in Paris. After the founding of Maria's and Aoui's School for the Blind, the rest of the world followed suit. In the 1800s, many more schools for the blind appeared on the European continent. Great Britain had 3 schools founded for the blind in Liverpool, Edinburgh, and Bristol. These schools were different from Maria's, though. They taught a trade rather than basic educational subjects like reading and writing. In Britain, it was believed that the blind should learn a trade so that they could support themselves better when they are adults. In Vienna, a different model of a blind school was created. Johann Wilhelm Klein, with some assistance from Maria Theresia, founded a school that included both blind and sighted students. He believed that the blind should be integrated into the classroom with students who were sighted, because the two really aren't that different. He believed that the blind should have the same opportunities for a good education and a chance at a good job. Another school opened in the United States with a similar concept. Samuel Gridley Howe opened a rehabilitation school for the blind in Boston. This school, called the New England Institution for the Education of the Blind, worked to educate blind students and help them train for an independent life. In the 1900s, schools for the blind became more and more common. Eventually, blind schools stopped being charity funded and began to be government funded. Into the 1900s, blind students became integrated into schools with sighted children. Today, almost all blind students attend public school with their sighted peers in the United States. This was possible because of the 1975 Education for All Handicapped Children Act. This is ultimately a result of Maria's activism for education for the blind. Maria Theresia Von Paradis taught the world many lessons. She showed the world that blind people are just as able to succeed in this world as sighted people. She also showed the world that a woman's purpose can be outside the home. Maria had many great achievements, including her compositions and her schools. She lives on through her music, especially her most famous piece, Sicilian. Like many other female composers, many of Maria's works have been lost or forgotten, but her actions will not be. Maria broke many barriers and should forever be remembered for it.